Yesterday afternoon, my wife and I went for a walk around a local park. She's 14 weeks pregnant with twins, and when we got to the park, we walked around a little walled garden. It's maintained by volunteers, beautiful flowers, bird feeders. We often just go to spend an hour to watch the robins and blue tits and wood pigeons feeding there. Lovely little place. Only sort of place that you get in a high trust society like England used to be. And when we arrived, there was a woman. She was pregnant and she was walking her 2 to 3 year old toddler around on a scooter. And there were a gang of youths from the local college loitering, littering, hollering, climbing trees, filming each other on their phones, ruining the area and making it unsafe. And the youths were of the demographic that perpetrate the disproportionate amount of violent crime and antisocial behaviour in London. So my wife and I decided to leave. And as we were walking away from this garden, there is a one-way road that leads out of the park where there is a nice little pub where we had our wedding reception. We took our wedding reception photos in this garden, so it's usually beautiful and very secure. And we heard a car creeping up behind us. So we moved out the way to let them pass, and the car moved next to us, and out of the passenger window, someone waved a machete at us. And then they sped off towards the direction of the high street. This is quite a common story in Britain, but what's even more common is that the police don't care. Because I filed an online police report immediately, I provided the colour, the make, and the number plate, the license plate if you're in the States, of the car, the exact location, the time, and within the hour I received a call from the Metropolitan Police. And as viewers can see with this letter that's had the information redacted, here, the police did nothing. The woman on the other end of the line, very nice, asked me what make the car was, if I saw who the driver was, what the profile of the youths were. As you can expect, they were all black between the ages of 16 and 18. And after I gave all that information, in one of the most surveilled places in the world, in a car park, which presumably, outside a quite bougie pub, has a fair amount of CCTV, you'd expect they would, so that they can track who shows up and doesn't pay their parking. They're very keen on cracking down on that. They said, well, there's nothing more they can do. What they did do is they ran the license plate through their system, and they found that this car had been reported multiple times for driving around with stolen plates. So they said they're going to put a call out to police officers that are patrolling in the area to keep an eye out for the car. I did suggest it might be linked to a local drill rap postcode county lines drug gang that might be operating in the area, because you can get maps of this stuff, right? Because the drill rappers are so low in impulse control that they decide to shout out their postcode to mark their territory so the police know where they're operating. And I suggested as such because there's a little side road near the park where a black Mercedes has pulled up multiple times, and the kids from the local college, again, demographics ubiquitously black, walk up to that car, and they talk to this older gentleman who is in his 20s or 30s in a very nice motor vehicle, who I'm sure has gotten this through purely legitimate means. They talk to him through the passenger side window, and then they just leave. And the Met Police person on the other end of the line, she suggested this might have something to do with drug dealing. Excellent. So I suggested they deploy some officers around the area, and she said, oh yeah, we might look into that. What we might do is send a community support officer into the school to talk to the students. Okay, there's no consequences for this kind of behaviour. For waving a machete around, for intimidating mothers and their children, for doing illicit drug deals with school kids. Stern talking to isn't going to solve this. Lengthy prison sentences and deportations where possible will solve this. But yet the Met Police don't seem interested in cracking down on this. And so it's particularly insulting when, as I'm about to record, and it's like a portent from the gods, the Home Office X account says knife robberies has fallen by 21% in major hotspots since June 2024. The use of enhanced intelligence and the targeting of repeat and high-harm offenders has meant that 3,285 fewer people have experienced the fear of being held at knife point in these areas. I genuinely wonder if they're monitoring my Twitter account at this point. I'm only half joking. But this is because yesterday they had this blitz on a crackdown on dodgy high street shops, naming specifically money laundering for criminal gangs in vape and phone shops. And that's after the BBC report that, of course, exposed a shop in Woolwich, again, neighbouring borough of mine, was acting as a money laundering front for smuggling Afghans over via the English Channel into the country. But it's also after I released a fairly viral video on X on the topic, and then this post yesterday, again, almost 400,000 views. It's almost like the agenda of the Home Office to sort of counter-signal what's going wrong in our country with crime mainly perpetrated by people who never needed to be here in the first place, is sort of crowdsourcing from my X feed. But the reason there is a pattern here isn't because I'm that influential, it's because it's so ubiquitous. Almost everyone I know has a story like this. Just in the comments under this post, there were so many people saying, yeah, I got mugged last year, yeah, my house got broken into, yeah, I had a gang of youths waving a knife around at me, and the Met Police gave me a crime number and fobbed me off and told me have a nice day. I mean, this letter was only a couple of hours after I filed the police report. Again, I gave them a description of the perpetrators. I said which school they went to, probably. I said the colour, the make, and the license plate of the car. They know that the car is driving on stolen plates. There's CCTV everywhere, and yet they sent me the following letter saying, "Thank you for reporting a crime to the Metropolitan Police Service. We understand this has been a difficult time for you, and we want to thank you for your patience while we completed our initial investigation. Your case has been reviewed by the Crime Recording and Investigation Bureau, who are responsible for determining whether a case is sent for further investigation. Unfortunately, under our crime assessment policy, there are no reasonable lines of enquiry we can follow. The investigation team has therefore made the decision to close the case." I don't know, monitor the school, look at the CCTV in the area, from the high street, from the pub, from the school itself, for the last 24 hours. That might be useful. Or maybe stick a few police officers, or plainclothes police officers, even better, in the high street, in adjacent roads, monitoring the park. I mean, the amount of times I've been to that park, and I have, by hand, just picked up the discarded cartons and drinks bottles and napkins and cutlery that these youths have just thrown into the flower beds when they've finished with their lunch. And I'm not getting paid for that. I don't have a grabber. So, I mean, God knows what I'm touching. But it's a beautiful little park, and I don't want it to be spoiled by people for whom our universe means nothing. But also, the idea that this is coming to an end, this epidemic of what they keep euphemizing as knife crime, but it's urban youths stabbing each other and your average white Brit being caught in the crossfire. The idea that that is on the wane doesn't match up to most people's lived experience. Now, it is possible that statistics outweigh someone's lived experience, but per a paraphrase of Jeff Bezos that my friend Carl Benjamin is fond of citing, if people's direct experience is producing a pattern and they're telling you one thing, but your numbers are telling you another, then your numbers are probably wrong, because the inputs into statistics shape what kinds of data is gathered. And so statistics themselves can lie, because the people gathering the statistics set the parameters that privilege some things and exclude another. And so if we keep seeing, because of CCTV or the camera phones everyone has in our pocket, a pattern of violence, particularly among a given demographic, which happens to show up in videos and photos, but the government keeps telling us, don't worry, crime is going down, then it just feels like we're being gaslit. It feels like we're living under a regime of anarcho-tyranny where the government gives carte blanche to violent offenders under permissive anti-racing police policies. They cease stop and search. They let violent criminals out of prison early. Keir Starmer did 2 rounds of that almost immediately after being elected Prime Minister. But they're saying, don't worry, knife crime is down. Then what they're doing is they're making you feel insecure and unsafe, and they are manufacturing consent for your average voter to vote for the government to take more surveillance powers, more power to crack down on political dissidents under the guise of inflicting the full force of the law, as Keir Starmer is fond of saying, on these violent criminals. Meanwhile, the violent criminals themselves go free because to actually lock them up would be racist. And the reason I point this out is just because in the last sort of 24 hours alone, there have been a number of videos of this. This is in Burgess Park. Just 3 scholars dueling with machetes. Again, very, very fortunate that nobody was fatally stabbed or injured here. And then one just gets on an e-scooter and flees the scene. Everyone else is kind of watching like it's a zoo enclosure from behind a metal fence. And of course they're filming it all. It doesn't seem that anyone's urgently calling the police about this. There was another stabbing as well. This is in Clapham High Street. Clapham is constantly afflicted by these teen takeovers, these youth raids, despite the fact that there are many youth clubs around. Very conspicuously here, it's a KFC that they were stabbed in. There's a photo of the crime scene. And then another one as well. This is in Lee Green. Again, not that far from me. I think a couple of boroughs over, not that far from Lewisham. And it's just a machete brawl in broad daylight. In the middle of the street, as cars are passing, as people are walking their children past. Why are these people here? Why do we have to put up with this? Isn't it conspicuous that you don't see a bunch of white kids dueling with kitchen knives like their lightsabers at the end of the prequels? It's one demographic that disproportionately commits these kinds of crimes. And it's one demographic that thinks to not only carry these knives in the first place, but escalate to lethal violence over the slightest bit of disrespect. Or, not even that. I didn't even say anything to the people that were waving a knife at me. They didn't know who I was. It's just some sort of weird flex over territory to impress their friends, because for some reason they think intimidating, law-abiding, polite people is... They don't even think it's virtuous, they just think it's funny. Like, we don't understand these people. We don't understand how they think. They only respond to force. And so, all we need is a kind of Bukele-style crackdown. Mass incarcerations to discourage this kind of behaviour, and to take the 1% of the total population that is disproportionately responsible for this kind of violent crime, and put them the hell away from the rest of us. Put them away from my family, put them away from my children who are on the way, put them away from these beautiful gardens that well-meaning English people give up their unpaid hours to tend to make it so that we have a beautiful, quiet space to go and retreat to. We can't even have that anymore. We can't have nice things because of miscreants like this, who the authorities that refuse to imprison them, who refuse to punish them, refuse to discourage their delinquent behaviour that escalates to violence, like, bumping through the tube barriers without paying their fare. Just because the authorities in power that refuse to punish them for their behaviour say, this is apparently our strength. These people built our civilization, even though they couldn't build their own, and when they come to ours, be it America, be it Europe, be it Britain, they just make everything worse for all of us who would just like a quiet life. And you might be saying, oh, aren't you stereotyping? Well, let's go to the knife crime statistics. This is from Sean Bailey, again, black chap, previously run for Mayor of London against Sadiq Khan. And the statistics that he pointed out in February of 2022, this is before the Boris wave seemed to double the black population of Britain. Despite making up only 13% of London's total population, there's that number again, black Londoners account for 45% of London's knife murder victims, 61% of knife murder perpetrators, and 53% of knife crime perpetrators. So you can see the disparity there between knife murder victims and knife murder perpetrators. So 16% disparity between the perpetrators and the victims, which means that black perpetrators are terrorising law-abiding white British Londoners, the very few that are left who haven't fled the area. And again, we know this is the problem because London itself is no longer an English city. I mean, this was in 2021. This was before the Boris wave. This is before things got particularly worse. And you can see the outer areas of London, in Essex, up near Epping and Romford, they're sort of 75 to 65% white British. And then you get down to these areas. So this is sort of the area that I'm in, like southeast London, bits of Kent over here with Sevenoaks, Swanley, and then you've got Bexley. There are nicer areas of Bexley, and there are really horrible areas of Bexley, like Erith and Thamesmead and bits of Belvedere. But then there's Bexley Village near Hall Place, which is, pubs and traditional English gardens, quite nice. And then there's still bits like Old Bexley and Sidcup. And then you've got areas of Bromley, which are still upmarket, so you've still got bits of Chislehurst and Sundridge Park, but then you've also got bits near Lewisham, which are like Grove Park, and then Bromley High Street has just become a carsey because of the new bus routes from places like Crystal Palace. Beckenham's really gone downhill. Even so, these are the areas of London that just voted Conservative, that Reform are targeting, because these are the areas of London where if you work in London and need to commute in, but you don't want the diversity, You don't want the demographics, you don't want the crime of London, you tend to pay a premium to live in. And they, as of the last census, are about 65% white British. If you zoom in, there are better areas. Like I said, Longlands, there's Sidcup, there's Chislehurst, there's Bickley. But again, this is the last census. And so things are worsening. The urban sprawl of London is growing like a cancer. It's consuming things like a blob. And because of the new bus routes, because of expanding catchment areas of schools in places like Bexley and Chislehurst, we're getting the worst detritus from New Cross, Lewisham, Thamesmead, Erith, and they're behaving just as they do in the inner city. I mean, Eltham is appalling now. Eltham Palace, beautiful site of Henry VIII's stately home. And now look at the High Street, it's just a third world slum. And so, eventually, and this is something that I say with no joy, because again, I want to raise a family. My family have lived in this area for going on 4 generations. Eventually, nowhere is safe, because a small minority that do not need to be here will ruin it for the rest of us, and the police will do nothing. But they'll keep telling you that crime is down. So these are the most recent crime statistics, knife crime statistics from the ONS, published in the year ending December 2025. And they say that knife-enabled crime recorded by the police, very important there, decreased by 10% in the year ending December 2025 to 49,151 offences, compared to year ending December 2024 with 54,548 offences. Levels remained 11% lower than year ending March 2020 with 55,170 offences. Most knife-enabled crimes are categorised as assault with injury and assault with intent to cause serious harm, 44%, and robbery, 40%. Fewer than 1% of knife-enabled crimes were homicide offences. And the reason is not because people are committing fewer lethal stabbing attacks. It's because medical technology has improved to the extent where more lives are saved in emergency scenarios where someone has been near fatally stabbed. We'll get onto one of those scenarios that police are involved in later. We're going to revisit that. But this also doesn't mean that knife crime overall is going down, because, as they say, knife-enabled crime recorded by police. Because this is community-on-community violence, the likelihood that the drill rap gangs are going to call the police when one has stabbed another is low. So the actual stabbing instances are still going on. Just more of them are being caught on camera phones now, because CCTV and pocket surveillance from your average person is ubiquitous. But it does mean that if these communities are still stabbing each other in broad daylight, over territory, over honour, over drug deals, whatever, blood feuds, it means that it's still going on, it's not being reported by these communities, and if it is still going on, the number of civilian bystander casualties that get caught in the fray will continue to stay high. And whether or not this is decreasing, okay, let's say it is, because I would be happy if it was, why is it going on in the first place? Because none of these people needed to be here. None of these kids need to be on the streets. The parents should be held responsible for raising these delinquents. If these people have a criminal record, they should be denaturalized and deported. We can just send them back to whichever country produced this kind of person. Because this behaviour, unfortunately, is ubiquitous in the countries of origin. We only have to look at the various genocides committed with machetes in places like Rwanda or the Congo to see that, unfortunately, this behaviour is very common and it isn't solved with education or youth clubs or social housing or anti-racist policing policies. If anything, that makes it worse. And as of April 2026, the BBC reports that knife killings are down by 21%. Crime statistics published on Thursday by the ONS show 172 homicides involving a knife or sharp instrument were recorded by police forces in 2025, compared with 217 in 2024. Overall knife-related crime fell by 10% in 2025 compared to 2024. As I mentioned, more than a quarter of knife-related offences were recorded by the Met Police, although it saw a 17% fall in recorded knife crime compared with the previous year. Okay. The Met Police are the ones that handled my complaint. So, does my report of a knife-based crime go in their database? Because I was told by the operator on the other end of the line that this would be recorded as a Section 4 public order offence, I think. Even though this is a gang with a machete intimidating mothers and their children in a public place, possibly linked to county lines drug gangs. And they're just not going to investigate it. They're instead going to log it down as a public order offence that they don't need to chase up. So, again, how many of these crimes are being properly recorded? How many of them are not being followed up? How many aren't being reported either because the people don't believe the police will follow up, or because intercommunal violence means they don't want to snitch? I'm sorry, I just don't believe these statistics. And the lack of belief in these statistics and the perception that crimes are getting worse, particularly driven by just the video evidence of it on social media, means that people are discouraged to leave their house, to go and visit London, to spend time in local parks, and people just want to get away because they just can't relax in their own town, in their own home. Actual police data as well, it points out here, and this is how they can lie with statistics, showed a 1% fall in recorded shoplifting offences to 509,566 in 2025, compared with 2024, despite recent surges in the crime. For example, the teen takeovers we've seen in Clapham. The reason? The ONS notes that the Home Office recently clarified to police forces that they should record shoplifting where violence or threats of violence are used as robbery of business property. Right, so they've changed the way they're recorded to decrease the number of recordings, only in the instance where the shop staff are threatened because they try to stop these teen takeovers from raiding Marks and Spencer's or JD Sports or whatever other vital service that they need to go and do. These are all organised on social media, by the way, so they have the accounts of the perpetrators. They're posting videos of themselves. You could just identify them, snatch them up, and throw them in juvie, but they don't, because that would be racist. There's also data to suggest that the vast majority of crimes in this country not only go unsolved, but don't result in a charge. They barely get investigated. So this is from the Home Office. In the 12 months to March 2025, 4.5 million victim-based offences were recorded by the police, and this was a 2% decrease from the previous year. At the end of the year, 7.9% were still under investigation. So if you look at the graph here, you can see in the darkest possible purple is the charged or summonsed cases, the cases that result in a charge being brought forward or a court summons. And for the last couple of years, it's been between 6 or 5%. So 94-95% of crimes go without a charge or a summons. Bear in mind the amount of evidence that I provided to the police in this instance. So, they have the car colour, the car model, the profile of the offender, the offence in question, which I think they improperly recorded, the fact that this car had been recorded with faulty number plates before, and yet nothing. They say, as they say in the letter they provided to me, the investigation team has therefore made the decision to close the case. So my instance yesterday went in the 94-95% of cases that were just closed, with nothing to result from it. So the people that are still riding around thinking it's funny and acceptable to swing machetes around at families in parks, no consequences for them. Nevertheless, the police had the time to show up at my door for a false, politically motivated domestic abuse complaint a couple of months ago. Because that's really important. David Shipley wrote a really good piece in The Spectator about this. He points out only 5.5% of all crimes where there is a victim result in a charge. Perhaps the police are making a liberal use of cautions and other non-charge resolutions, and not really. Of the almost 4.5 million outcomes assigned to victim-based cases, only 250,000 resulted in a charge or summons, and around 100,000 resolved in court. This means just 8% of all offences result in a charge or some other resolution. Of the rest, almost 2 million cases the police couldn't identify a suspect, while in around 1.7 million instances, evidential difficulties of one kind or another prevented further action. These numbers have actually improved slightly in the last year, 2023 to 2024. In the previous year, only 4.8% of victim-based crimes resulted in a charge, which means, in practice, the average criminal has less than a 10% chance of being caught and facing consequences for a crime they commit. If you were told that there's a 90% chance that you could get away with a crime, no matter pretty much what it was, because if you look at the statistics for the types of crimes here, they're all pretty much the same, right? There's a bar chart here. I mean, for example, only 2.8% of rape offences result in a charge or summons, whereas the vast majority is an inconclusive investigation or have too many evidential difficulties to actually follow up with. If you were told that you could get away with most of these crimes, and you're a person predisposed to criminality because you have no moral prohibition that says another person's life is of value, that says I have a long time horizon preference where I don't need to impulsively steal something to get what I want. If you were told that there's only 10% chance that you could be caught, and even then you might get a slap on the wrist and early release for good behaviour so that the police can tick their anti-racism quota boxes. Are you surprised that they then go and do it? Because I'm not, unfortunately. And so this is quite the contrast to a recent case that I covered earlier in the week of Henry Nowak. So Vikram Digwa, a Sikh man, encountered Henry Nowak, an 18-year-old British-Polish finance student. He encountered Nowak walking home from a night out with friends. Nowak had drank well below the legal limit of intoxication to drive, so he wasn't drunk at all. He was pretty much sober. He was on his phone on Snapchat, so this encounter was recorded, and Digwa got into a verbal altercation with Nowak, where Nowak was asking, "Oh yeah, are you a bad man, yeah?" Basically using, inner city slang, because Digwa was carrying a large knife, an 8-inch blade. Now, he claims he has a religious exemption to carry this knife, an exemption that isn't afforded to Englishmen that want to defend themselves. I mean, pepper spray isn't even legal in our country. Nevertheless, he already had his kirpan, his little blade, on a necklace around his neck, which fulfills the Sikh obligation to carry his blade because they're a sort of warrior culture, because they were fighting between Muslims and Hindus in the Indian subcontinent for hundreds of years. He then took out his 8-inch blade and stabbed Henry Nowak. Seems to have stabbed him directly in the lung. Nowak ran away, he was trying to jump a neighbour's fence, left a trail of blood behind him. And then, between then and when the police arrived, Digwa's family showed up at the scene. Digwa stole Nowak's phone and pocketed it, seemingly trying to hide the evidence. Digwa's mother took the offending article, the blade, took it home and tried to hide it. Digwa's father and brother stayed at the scene, gaslit Nowak and told the police he wasn't bleeding, he wasn't stabbed, he was just drunk. Nowak was begging the police to listen to him, but the police handcuffed him and left him to drown to death in his own blood, because Digwa said, and the family said, that Nowak was being racist. So, trail of blood the police apparently didn't see. Nowak was saying, "I can't breathe." Didn't matter because he's white. Police didn't care. He apparently did a racism. He didn't, by the way, because when Digwa was in the back of the police car with his brother, and they were speaking in, whatever, Punjabi, as it was reviewed later on the police body cam, they were talking about the stabbing, they admitted to the stabbing, and no mention of racism was made when they were speaking in their own language when they thought the police couldn't hear. So, all of this was a fabrication. All of it was to save face, to preserve their izzat, their social standing, to advantage their family, their clan, their ethnic group, at the expense of this young lad, this model student's life. But the police really, really cared when they thought someone had done a racism. They didn't care that he had been stabbed, died in police custody. And they don't care when urban youths are driving around waving machetes at law-abiding families like mine. Oh, but they really care, though, when 2 people walk into a mosque in San Diego and shoot it up. I didn't realise that San Diego was in the middle of London. Why are the Met Police issuing a statement about a San Diego mosque shooting? Because they say, this attack will cause deep concern and distress within Muslim communities across the United Kingdom and all over the world. There's a typo in there. Probably because some diversity intern wrote it. What they're doing is they're trying to glue shut the lid on sputtering community tensions because they realise that the imported communities in our country are much more volatile than the natives. And so, through their anti-racist policing strategy, through their hate crime operational guidance as a result of Britain's George Floyd, the Stephen Lawrence murder and the Macpherson report that invented the term institutional racism, that accused that the Met Police of being too slow to act against Stephen Lawrence's killers because for some reason they really hated black people. And the evidence, so-called, they got for this was police officers confessing to the private thoughts of other police officers that they couldn't possibly know about. All because of this. Because of Muslim community advisors that praised October the 7th, by the way, that have sat on the Met Police's advisory board. Because of this, they need to play umpire to the violent, tribal, imported minority groups in major cities like London. But if the native population disapprove of the behaviour of those groups, then they come down on them like a ton of bricks. Those cases aren't dropped. Guarantee the follow-up for hate crime and public order offences and violations of Section 127 of the Communications Act, guarantee they have a much higher follow-through rate than the 95% of victim-reported crimes that do not result in a charge or summons. And so I just have to ask, what is the point of the police? They don't do anything when your life is in danger. Instead, in the case of poor Henry Nowak, if your killer happens to be of the right colour or the right religion and accuses you of racism, they'll cuff you and let you bleed to death in the street just so they don't get called racist.